New England hasn't fared very well when it comes to blaming people for supernatural stuff. From witches to vampires and the curious case of Mercy Brown, join me after dark to discover the truths of the undead. But first, don't make me put you on trial for this, but settle in with a like, a subscribe, or a good evening in the comments. In the 1600s, the infamous Salem witch trials ended up with 200 people accused and 19 executed by hanging in colonial Massachusetts. You'd think that lightning wouldn't strike twice, but 200 years later, farmers in the backwoods of New England became convinced that their neighbors were returning from the dead, and public hysteria took over the area once again. It all started innocently enough in 1810, as outbreaks of a deadly disease were sweeping through New Hampshire. Locals were scared as entire families were being wiped out within weeks, and doctors were at a loss for what to do. The wasting illness was unforgiving, preying on the young and the old equally, turning healthy people into walking corpses with sunken eyes and ashy skin. Like zombies, but no, like vampires, according to the residents. While doctors at the time were quick to point out this was merely a physical affliction, local townsfolk remained unconvinced and took to the streets to solve the mystery themselves. Due to this hysteria, for years, New England became known as the vampire capital of America. New England wasn't alone in these beliefs, though. Europe was going through a similar vampire panic around the same time, with sightings of the undead across the continent. Newspapers even picked up the stories quickly and played a big role in this growing panic across the world. In September 1884, the St. Charles Herald published a front-page story on vampire attack reports, sharing details on rituals being conducted in different corners of the world to stop them. While the publication wasn't suggesting people in New England should do the same, it's very possible the idea of pushing a stake through the heart of the undead came from this very news. But what was really going on? During the 19th century, violent outbreaks of tuberculosis and other lung diseases were known as consumption. Medical professionals knew very little about the disease or how to stop it, but they did know it spread quickly among those living under the same roof, usually with really devastating results. The New England vampire panic was very likely the result of one of those outbreaks. Throughout the 19th century, tuberculosis was the deadliest disease in the world, causing about 25% of all deaths among the population. Throughout much of the century, doctors were unaware that the infection was airborne and spread mostly through coughing, so there was little to be done once somebody fell ill. The most common treatment, though, that was a combination of prescribed bloodlettings and rest, which neither one of those did much to help with recovery. Those who survived often suffered recurrences and either died of tuberculosis or other breathing problems later on. For panicked New England citizens who believed there was something more sinister at play, finding a way to protect the survivors became almost an obsession. The bodies of suspected vampires were exhumed and examined, looking for clues that the corpse was actually undead. The most common sign was that a body was still looking fresh and not decomposed enough when it was exhumed, and even more clear proof was a heart still containing a lot of blood after death. And while these exhumations started as something clandestine done by neighbors and family members, many town fathers and clergymen eventually started voting on whether a certain person should be exhumed or not. Once a vampire was identified, there were different ways to deal with the undead and prevent its return. In many towns, certain organs, especially the heart, were removed and burned before the body was reburied. And in other places, family members would eat the ashes as a remedy for their illness, while others would inhale the smoke as the organs burned. Some towns beheaded the corpse or simply turned them face down to confuse the undead and make sure that he or she wouldn't find their way out of the grave. Perhaps one of the most famous vampire cases in New England is that of Mercy Lena Brown. Born in Exeter, Rhode Island, Mercy was one of the many Brown family members who contracted consumption. Mercy was just 19 when she died in 1892, a few years after her mother and sister had also succumbed to the disease. Mercy's father, George Brown, survived, and his survival, along with the panic sweeping through the region, got neighbors thinking. Perhaps a vampire in the family was to blame. Against his better judgment, George allowed the locals to exhume the bodies of his family. Now, Mercy had died recently, and it was winter, and she had been kept in an above-ground crypt. Thanks to these conditions, her body exhibited almost no signs of decomposition, her heart so full of blood that it almost felt like it was ready to start beating again. That was all it took. That was all the proof the villagers needed to decide that Mercy Brown was one of the undead. By this time, Mercy's brother Edwin had also contracted consumption, so after burning her heart, the ashes were mixed with water and given to Edwin as a cure. He died 2 months later, but the illness died with him, and no other family members or close neighbors contracted tuberculosis. To the Brown family and other locals, the treatment had worked. Rumor has it that Bram Stoker himself was inspired by the case to write the 1897 novel that would give him immortality. One of Dracula's most fascinating characters is Lucy Westenra, a teenage girl who succumbs to Count Dracula and is eventually exhumed from her crypt and killed with a stake through a heart. A nod to Mercy herself, perhaps? We'll never know. I'm Sabrina Seek, and until we rise from the dead for the next episode of After Dark, keep it creepy and believe it or not.